Deputy.
Yeah, Cormargot last Count Corla, and I see that Deputy Pat Buckley's here with me this morning, and the two of us fought in the trenches when this boundary transition was undertaken back in 2017. And essentially my question here this morning is to ask that will any assessment be now undertaken or at some stage in the future in regards to scrutinising the successes and the failures of the expansion of the Cork City Council boundary. And the purpose of the question is not to reignite the debate begun back, as I said, in 2016, but it is motivated by a genuine desire to undertake an analysis of how the boundary transition has worked or not worked. I myself live in the new city area, and to be fair to Cork City Council, I would contend that we have seen an improvement in services locally in Glanmire and indeed in other areas such as Blarney, Tower and Dunamore, and towards Dunamore and Inniscarra. That said, any process which involves essentially doubling the population of the city and increasing it fivefold geographically is bound to propose challenges, and I wish to speak of some of those challenges this morning. Before I give a few examples of where I think issues arise, I would like to first say that all citizens of Cork, and especially those in the transition areas, were told over and over again that by transferring into a new jurisdiction, the level of service they received would not be affected or diminished in any way. However, this has not been the case, and I have identified a few areas here, but there are a lot more which we might discuss at a future date. But one area I would like to highlight is in regards to development contributions. And when the city initially took over large tracts of rural agricultural land in the former county area, there was no contribution policy in regards to planning contributions devised for agricultural buildings, for example. So you had farmers who were building farm sheds and other outhouses and so on that were being charged commercial rates as if they were building buildings inside the city centre. So again, that process, finally now it did cease, but it took about 14 months for that process to be weaned out. And that's one example of where the boundary didn't proceed as smoothly as it possibly could. A second point I'd like to make is in regards to planning applications for one-off houses, and inside here a lot of us would speak about the National Planning Framework and its potential impacts on rural housing currently. But apart from and aside from the National Planning Framework and its impacts, there is clearly a different interpretation of the existing development plan in Cork City Council. So Cork County Council would have a higher success rate in terms of delivering one-off houses in those former rural areas. And again, I think that's down to a different interpretation of the existing plan. The third point I'd like to make is in regards to LIS and CIS schemes. Again, in rural areas, you'd be familiar, Minister, that we would have many roads that people would pay a contribution towards. And people would sign up. They'd typically pay 10 to 15% contribution towards their road to be done. And again, many of those projects were lined up, but unfortunately when the boundary transitioned, those schemes all fell by the wayside. And I've asked Minister Humphreys here about this specific issue on a number of occasions via oral PQ and PQ, and essentially she said that perhaps Cork County Council would give some of its budget for CIS and LIS schemes to City Council. That suggestion isn't workable, and we know that one jurisdiction isn't going to give some of its roads budget away to another jurisdiction. And the fourth point, and it's probably something I'll touch on after you speak yourself, but it's my main motivation for raising this question today, is in regards to planning enforcement. And the agreement between the two local authorities was that Cork City Council would take all new planning enforcement files and Cork County Council would continue to engage with active planning enforcement files on their own system. And unfortunately, post-transition arrangement, Cork County Council received legal advice, which I believe goes against the spirit of the agreement that they entered into, that they would now not be the competent authority to prosecute any planning enforcement issues. And I think that's a major cause for concern, and it goes against the spirit of that agreement. So I look forward to your response. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Deputy for raising this issue and providing an opportunity to give, obviously, an update to the House. The Cork boundary alteration is the most significant of its kind undertaken in the state and represents a major reorganisation of local government in Cork. The main aim of the boundary extension was to allow for the potential further development within a new city council area, while also incentivising higher density development and reducing the risk of sprawl. The extended city area now includes Ballincollig, Carrigrawn, Blarney, Glanmire and Cork Airport, and the population of the city increased by over 85,000 people. The Local Government Act of 2019 was enacted on the 31st of January 2019 to provide for the transfer of part of the administrative area of Cork City Council to the administrative area of Cork City, and this took place when the new councils took office after the local elections in May 2019. The Act also provided for the establishment of the statutory Cork Boundary Alteration Implementation Oversight Committee to oversee arrangements for the alteration of the boundary in accordance with the statutory implementation plan. Responsibility for the detailed planning and implementation of the reorganisation process rests primarily with the two local authorities, subject to the guidance and supervision provided by the Oversight Committee to ensure compliance with the implementation plan. Work on finalising the transfer of functions was completed in late 2020, and both authorities have confirmed that all actions contained in the statutory implementation plan have been discharged, with the new service delivery models now in place in both authorities. The Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage is aware that a small number of outstanding practical issues are still being worked through by both authorities, with support being provided by the Department, and are confident that these outstanding matters will soon be settled. These matters relate to Section 13A, Section 31 and Section 34 of the Local Government Act 2019, and they mostly revolve around planning matters and the responsibility of individual planning cases that were in train at the time of the boundary transfer day. The Department is working closely with the two local authorities to resolve these matters. However, should the need arise, the Local Government Act 2019 also provides a mechanism for resolving outstanding issues up to and including a ministerial decision. Thank you.
Margaret, and thank you, Minister, for the response. And I suppose, look, as I said at the outset, this isn't an attempt to rehash the boundary argument that we had, going back 4 or 5 years ago. I do welcome in the response that you said that, essentially the responsibility for, I suppose, settling any outstanding issues resides with the two local authorities, but at the same time, it is subject to the guidance and supervision provided by the Oversight Committee to ensure compliance with the implementation plan. And the question I would have there is, you have identified that there are a number of problems, albeit I think it's described as small problems, a small number of outstanding practical issues. I'd love to know how many times that Oversight Committee has met subsequent to that boundary agreement happening. I'd love to know what, I suppose, the outcomes of those meetings were, what advice was given to both authorities, because these issues have been going on for a couple of years now. And for me, as a rep in the area, I don't see any resolution to the outstanding problems that are there. So if it is open for the Oversight Committee to ensure compliance with the implementation plan, I would ask maybe that you would go back to the Minister to ensure that that Oversight Committee would reconvene and would resolve the outstanding issues. Because, as I said, it's very unfair for people, and in particular, as I said, the real issue or the real motivation for me raising this is to do with planning enforcement issues. And people that reside lawfully and, I suppose, doing their own developments within the confines of the Planning Act, they're often living beside people that don't. And I suppose for those people to see the failures of both Cork City and, in particular in this case, Cork County Council in terms of dealing with, active and outstanding planning enforcement issues, I think needs to be met head on. And as I said, I don't really care which authority is to resolve those outstanding planning enforcement issues. I just want them resolved, and I think that's the least that people can expect in those areas. Thank you.
Good. And Pádraig?
Thank you, Deputy. I hear you very clearly on that. The actual Minister is hopeful that the outstanding matters can be resolved between the two authorities in the coming weeks, and therefore, while a review to determine the overall success of the boundary extension may be considered in the future, at this stage the implementation, it would be premature to look at that. It's considered beneficial, I think, to wait until both authorities have had time to settle into their new jurisdictions and there is sufficient data to do a review like as outlined. I'll also consider it important to allow the local authorities sufficient period of operation, taking account of the fact, obviously, that the additional stresses and strains that COVID has put on that implementation period. But as I said to you at the start, the Minister is hopeful that the outstanding matters which you have raised today can be resolved in the coming weeks.